What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. You don't need excessive description. We also don't need description that is just there for mere decoration. So don't describe your setting for the sake of setting. The role of description is to create images, and like anything else, it does more and suggests more than what's on the surface. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach, and each week we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. Descriptive language introduces and sustains the world of your story, but it does so much more than provide the physical setting where the action happens. It also establishes the emotional tone of each scene. It anchors the reader in time and place while immersing them in a tactile sensory experience. The description of your setting does multiple things at once. It doesn't just provide a locale, a coffee shop, a town, a room, or landscape. It creates mood, and it reveals your point of view character's interior. So in this episode, I'm going to give you 4 techniques for writing description of setting. I want you to think of making choices, not using description gratuitously, but selectively, and using it not as mere ornamentation, but to reveal something essential about your character in a way that camouflages and reveals simultaneously. So let's get right to it. Technique number 1, locate us early and often. You always want to anchor us in a particular place early in each scene. Where is the action set? Often writers will have the scene go on and on without anchoring us in a specific location, and so the characters seem to be floating in some disembodied state. The writer will eventually get to situating us in a place, but it's often too late in the scene. It's like an afterthought, and by that time, they've already lost the reader. So a common misstep is not enough setting. Sometimes characters will be in a specific place, which is established early on, but the description is quickly abandoned, and we get pages and pages of dialogue and a lot of irrelevant details that are just there for ornamentation. Or we won't be sure where the scene begins and we'll feel lost. So you always want to ground the reader and keep the reader grounded. In each scene, your characters are moving through space and time. They're not just thinking or talking. So whether you start with dialogue, action, or summary, get to where the characters are as soon as possible in every scene and keep anchoring the reader in the particular space where the action is happening. For example, in the novel Station 11, the opening scene starts like this. The king stood in a pool of blue light unmoored. This was Act 4 of King Lear, A Winter Night at the Elgin Theatre in Toronto. Throughout the opening chapter, the main point of view character, Jivan, moves from the audience to the stage where the actor has a fatal heart attack. Then once the paramedics arrive, he moves into the wings of the stage, then to the lobby, then outside. Snow was falling on Yonge Street. It startled Jivan when he left the theater, this echo of the plastic translucencies that still clung to his jacket from the stage. In a later scene, still chapter 1, he reached Allen Gardens, more or less the halfway point, and this is where he found himself blindsided by an unexpected joy. Arthur died. He told himself, you couldn't save him. There's nothing to be happy about. But there he was. He was exhilarated because he'd wondered all his life what his profession should be. And now he was certain, absolutely certain, that he wanted to be a paramedic. So we always know where we are in every scene. The precision of place anchors us instantly. It also shows his movement through the setting. There's an emotional progression. As Jivan moves from the audience to the stage, then the wings, the lobby, and finally outside. So the physical shifts mirror his emotional journey from bystander to active participant to someone on the edge of a personal revelation. The setting is not static. It moves with him, and his perception of it changes as his understanding of himself sharpens. So setting and character become inseparable. It grounds us in his internal experience. He reached Allen Gardens. He was exhilarated. So even during an emotional epiphany, the author doesn't lose track of physical space. We know exactly where he is. That geographic clarity lets the reader stay rooted even as the character's interior life shifts. That balance of internal and external is what makes the story work. It's what makes it so immersive. So we always know where we are. That gives the story gravity. The scenes don't float in vague emotional fog. They happen in places we can imagine, walk through, and feel. That clarity lets the emotional and thematic elements resonate more because the reader isn't struggling to figure out where they are. Okay, on to technique number 2. Be specific and selective. You never want to be general, and you don't want anything gratuitous. You don't need excessive description. We also don't need description that is just there for mere decoration. So don't describe your setting for the sake of setting. The role of description is to create images, and like anything else, it does more and suggests more than what's on the surface. So you want to use concrete, specific details. Here's an example from Margaret Atwood's novel, The Handmaid's Tale. We slept in what had once been the gymnasium. The floor was of varnished wood with stripes and circles painted on it for the games that were formerly played there. The hoops for the basketball nets were still in place, though the nets were gone. A balcony ran around the room for the spectators, and I thought I could smell faintly like an after image the pungent scent of sweat shot through with the sweet taint of chewing gum and perfume from the watching girls, felt skirted as I knew from pictures, later in miniskirts, then pants, then in one earring spiky green spiked hair. Dances would have been held there. The music lingered, a palimpsest of unheard sound. Style upon style, an undercurrent of drums, a forlorn wail, garlands made of tissue paper flowers, cardboard devils, a revolving ball of mirrors powdering the dancers with a snow of light. So this opening paragraph establishes the tone of the story, this tone of loss and decay and a longing for the past. The narrator, Offred, describes a setting that was once a gymnasium, now a place of confinement and oppression where she and other women sleep on army cots under the watchful eyes of the aunts. The room still bears remnants of its former life, like the basketball hoops and the scent of past events, creating a sense of nostalgia and a yearning for a lost world. Later in chapter 1, we get this: a chair, a table, a lamp. Above on the white ceiling, a relief ornament in the shape of a wreath. And in the center of it, a blank space, plastered over, like the place in a face where the eye has been taken out. There must have been a chandelier once. They've removed anything you could tie a rope to. So it's sparse, specific detail that anchors us in the physical space. A chair, a table, a lamp. So this description begins with blunt simplicity. This almost minimalist inventory makes the space feel bare, stripped down. We're in a room, probably utilitarian, probably controlled. So we have no adjectives, no flourishes. This starkness sets the tone. It's sterile, impersonal, maybe even oppressive. The visual focus creates a sense of unease. Above on the white ceiling, a relief ornament in the shape of a wreath. So we're drawn to look up, a surprising direction for a narrative focus. And that upward gaze shifts our perspective. The wreath might evoke something festive or ornamental, but here it feels cold and empty. And then we have the metaphor that invokes a feeling of dread, like the place in a face where the eye has been taken out. That line changes everything. Suddenly, the description is not neutral. It's disturbing. So the blank space in the ceiling becomes grotesque, like a mutilation. It tells us how the character feels in this room, violated, exposed, watched, or perhaps robbed of agency. So there's implicit storytelling through what's missing. There must have been a chandelier once. This tiny speculative line reveals time and loss. Something used to be here, something beautiful perhaps. So we sense a past erased. That blank ceiling is a symbol of what's been stripped away. And finally, it reveals the world's rules without telling us. They've removed anything you could tie a rope to. Here's the gut punch. One line changes the room from sterile to sinister. It implies suicide prevention, confinement, and total control. The reader realizes this isn't just a room, it's a prison or a detention center or some kind of place where despair is expected. But it's never stated outright. It's all subtext through setting. It's all imbued in carefully selected details. It creates tension and unease by focusing on absence, letting the setting imply the danger instead of stating it. Okay, on to technique number 3. Use the point of view character's filter. What your point of view character notices tells us more about them, how they feel, how they experience the world around them than any direct approach could. Setting is not disconnected from character. It's not simply a place to have your character do or say things. It's intimately connected to your character's mood, emotion, or frame of mind. What your character pays attention to, notices, or refuses to notice says more about his or her interior than anything direct. It's so much more powerful than telling us she felt sad or overwhelmed, worried, or high, whatever the internal experience is. Again, it's all about selection and specific details. You want to slant the details and blend the details of setting into the action. Remember, your character is moving through space and time, so keep us anchored as your character moves through the scene. Here's another example from Station 11. Now, at this point in the novel, a mysterious flu pandemic has taken over the world, and Jivan has been sequestered in his brother Frank's apartment for about 2 months, stockpiled with food and supplies. His brother, a paraplegic, has chosen to end his life, believing he can't survive in the post-pandemic world and wanting to spare Jivan the burden of caring for him. So just after sunset, he finally leaves the apartment and ventures out into the post-pandemic world. When the last light was fading over the lake, Jivan pushed the dresser aside, stepped out into the terrible corridor with its reek of death and garbage, and made his way down the stairs in darkness. He stood for several minutes behind the door that led to the lobby, listening before he eased it open and slipped through, heart pounding. The lobby was deserted, but the glass doors had been smashed. The world had emptied out since he'd last seen it. There was no movement on the plaza or on the street or in the distant expressway. A smell of smoke in the air with a chemical tinge that spoke of burning offices and house fires. But most striking was the absolute absence of electric light. Once in his early 20s, he'd been walking up Yonge Street around 11 p.m., and every light on the street had blinked out. For an instant, the city had vanished around him, and then the lights were back so quickly that it was like a hallucination. Everyone on the street asking their companions if they'd seen it too. Was it just me? And at the time, he'd been chilled by the suggestion of a dark city. It was as frightening as he would have imagined. He wanted only to escape. The moon was a crescent in the evening sky. He walked quietly as possible, the pack weighing him with every step. He avoided the roads as much as he could, the lake to his left, black water gleaming. The beach was pale light in the half light. So this demonstrates exactly how the external world reflects and deepens the internal world without ever naming an emotion directly. So we get what Jivan notices, and this tells us who he is and how he feels. The terrible corridor with its reek of death and garbage. That word terrible is not objective, it's emotionally charged. The corridor likely looks and smells the same to anyone, but Jivan's fear, grief, and sense of finality make it terrible to him. We're inside his skin. But most striking was the absolute absence of electric light. This line zeroes in on absence, not presence, and this tells us a lot about Jivan's mental state. He's overwhelmed by what's gone, not what remains. That's grief. That's loss. And he's not just seeing the world, he's processing it through memory. Once in his early 20s, he'd been walking up Yonge Street. This memory doesn't just add background, it mirrors the present moment. He recalls how afraid he was of a brief blackout years ago when it wasn't even real danger, it was just a glitch. And that contrast deepens the horror of the current darkness, which is total, real, and permanent. It's a brilliant use of point of view. The past refracts the present, and we learn about Jivan's lifelong sensitivity to threat, instability, or helplessness. So we're never in a generic space. Every detail comes through Jivan's perspective. The setting and the action are inseparable here. He's moving, he's deciding, he's feeling. Instead of telling us he's scared or burdened or grieving, the passage shows us how those emotions color the world around him. So memory, emotion, and physical space are all intertwined, which creates a layered, vivid reading experience. Okay, on to technique number 4, use sensory details. Sensory details ground the reader in the physical world, but in skilled writing, they do much more than that. They carry emotional weight, evoke memory, and shape the story's tone. So you want to think of them as emotional entry points, not just descriptive checkboxes. For example, when Jivan is leaving the apartment, he stood for several minutes behind the door that led to the lobby, listening. So the detail focuses on what he hears or doesn't hear. Silence here is filled with tension and uncertainty. Listening without hearing anything builds dread, fear, and caution. So it's not a generic, the hallway was quiet. It's an active, intentional silence. The lobby was deserted, but the glass doors had been smashed. So the smashed glass is a specific concrete image that shows disorder and danger. So we can picture it. We can feel it underfoot. We can imagine the cold air or the sharpness, but it's also symbolic. The world is broken now. The world had emptied out since he'd last seen it. There was no movement on the plaza or in the street or in the distant expressway. So we're getting sight again. The visual emptiness carries emotional weight. There's loss, abandonment, stillness in contrast to the usual city buzz. He also invokes the sense of smell, a smell of smoke in the air with a chemical tinge that spoke of burning offices and house fires. The chemical tinge isn't just evocative, it tells us what burned. This was no campfire. These were businesses, homes, lives. And then we have the pack weighing him with every step. This is kinesthetic. We feel this in his body. The burden is physical, but it's also emotional. It gives texture to his movement and reinforces the heaviness of his reality. So these sensory details are effective because they're specific. Chemical tinge is more powerful than just smoke. They serve mood and character. The sensory word reflects Jivan's fear, disorientation, and his grief. They layer physical with emotional experience. It's not just what he sees, it's how he sees it, why it matters, and what it evokes. And these details keep us anchored. As Jivan moves through the space, we move with him, moment by moment, sense by sense. Okay, let's wrap this up. In this episode, we explored how setting is so much more than just where your story takes place. We looked at how strong setting descriptions don't just decorate the page, they deepen character, carry emotion, and shape the reader's entire experience of the scene. We talked about 4 powerful techniques. Number 1, anchor us early in a specific place in each scene so your reader isn't floating. Number 2, be selective and specific. Use descriptive details to do story work, not just fill space. Number 3, filter everything through your point of view character. What they notice tells us who they are, what they're feeling and experiencing moment by moment. And number 4, engage the senses. You don't want to just check the boxes. You want to create emotional texture and resonance. The best description is never just about what's there. It's about what it means, how it feels, and how it reflects the inner world of your character. So as you return to your own writing this week, try asking yourself these questions. What does my setting reveal about my character's inner life? What emotions live inside the spaces I'm creating? And how can I invite the reader not just to see the world, but to feel it? When setting does more than paint a picture, when it reveals, reflects, and resonates, it transforms from a mere backdrop into a vital force that drives your story forward. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.